Вітаю всіх на нашому заході.
Greetings on our event, and the topic for today's meeting is called Out for Freedom, Invisible Ukrainian Civilians Held Hostage by Russia. So my name is Kristina Shkoder, Advocacy Manager of the campaign Where Are You People, public organization PR Army. So speaking about the civilians behind the Russian bars, that is the topic of our project and what we are going to talk today. Since the beginning of the full-scale war, 20% of Ukrainian territories are temporarily occupied, and millions of Ukrainians are the hostages on the temporarily occupied territories. And the human rights defenders will tell you the numbers, but thousands of people are behind the bars in Russian prisons on trumped-up charges. So these people have their rights are violated, and the Russian Federation violates any human rights and moral rights and rules. So these people are tortured. These people are behind the bars. Their relatives doesn't know anything about the house of these people, and they do not have the access to basic needs. And unfortunately, we have so many examples when these people, these civilians, are just dying. They are tortured to death, or they are kind of dying due to brain strokes or heart strokes, and that is what the Russian Federation says. And of course, we can only guess what actually happens with these people. The relatives of these people, they are just desperate. For example, yesterday, in the center of Kyiv, in the capital, there was the right of civilians and the relatives of the militaries who do not know what is happening to their relatives. They came to the walls of the Red Cross organization, and they were asking for the international organization to pay attention to their relatives. Unfortunately, the International Red Cross, OSCE, the UN organizations, in our opinion, in the opinion of NGOs and the human rights defenders will say their opinion, and we consider that the Geneva Convention is just on the paper, and no one follows its provision. And concluding the opening word, I would like to tell you a story of the civilians who returned from the Russian Federation, and it's a very touching story. This is a story of Olena, who stayed for 8 months in detention, and that were her neighbors who gave up her to the Russians because she was the wife of the military man, of the serviceman, and she stayed there for 4 months. And then it was said they made a movie like she sent to the territory of Ukraine. And after this movie was released, she was given to the labor abuse, labor tortured, and they were tortured, they were sexual abuse, and they were doing everything possible just to survive. That is just one single story out of millions. And our project, Art for Freedom, has an objective to show the experience of these people, to share the stories of these civilians who became the hostages of Kremlin and who became the victims of the Russian regime. This exhibition and illustration will travel around Europe. That is going to be Portugal, Germany, France, and we would like to draw attention to the civilians who are now behind the bars. So NGO public organizations, Common Sense Communication and PR Army initiated this project, and art mentors Oleh Hryshchenko and there is that is the co-founder of Pictoric Illustration Club, and one of the main objectives is using illustration as a powerful tool of communication with the public and disclosing the difficult topics. And art mentors, our art curators are with us today, and you can talk to them later. And I would like to pass the floor to Alexandra Romantsova, Executive Director of the Center for Civil Liberties, the Initiative Tribunal for Putin. Thank you very much for inviting, and indeed, art channels, art space is something that can help us to form the same vision, the same reaction on the most sensitive and the most touching stories in Ukraine. In Ukraine, we feel it very deep because of the relatives of these people and all the relatives who get engaged in different trips and projects, who are overcoming their fear to be public, to be on the stage, and sometimes they are so afraid to use English or the other language. And today is your day. Today is the International Day of the victims of the illegal imprisonment. That is not only about the people who are in prisons, but also that is a day of the people who suffer because their relative, their beloved ones, are in the prison. And I would like to draw attention that before we start talking on how it can work on the international level, I would like to say that in Ukraine, every Ukrainian has a chance to support these people by commenting, by visiting rights, by coming to the exhibitions, by coming to the performances, because in this way we become politically adult people. And these people are around us, and that is not Putin who doesn't allow us to support these people. So there are so many people who can be supported through these channels, and remember that, please. And now it is so important to explain why these exhibitions, why the art objects are so important for us, because we know that the attention, the human attention, the political attention, from time to time is switching from Ukrainian problems, because objectively, there are so many horrible things around, and there is no sense to compete on whose story is the most horrible. But nevertheless, we should remind people that any political object abroad can help the people to return alive, and that is extremely important. And that is time. And unfortunately, we have more than 100 bodies which were returned from the detention centers, and it's not the issue that they do not feel comfortable there, it's the threat for their life, and therefore we have to cooperate with the international structures abroad. Therefore, it's important to remind that if you have any kind of mandate, you have to use it 100%, and even if your mandate cannot overcome the critically aggressive position of the Russian Federation, nevertheless, you can say that, and thanks to the personal contact with the relatives, you can find out what else might be needed, what didn't pop up in your head. Beside this exhibition, we will have the tour of the relatives who are bringing the other exhibitions, and it's important, very important. All of us are in the stress, but on the international level, the art forces, the art impact, with these things we can raise this question again and again for the diplomats and the politicians. Ask these questions first in any dialogue with the Russian representatives. And the Russian Federation still has this dialogue. They have this dialogue with those people, with those who are interested in them economically, the countries of the so-called global south, we still have the contracts, the gas contracts or oil contracts with Europe. Yes, there will be an end to these contracts, but still there is communication, there is interest, and that means that the Russian Federation has the interest, which can be implemented through their act of release of illegally imprisoned Ukrainians, if they will respect all the requirements of the international humanitarian law on war prisoners, because war prisoners POV is a status which was designed to protect people and not just to be the target for the additional tortures and for the horrible environment, and therefore for the horrible conditions. And therefore we have to remind that to the international community, because OSCE, the Red Cross, the International Red Cross, and the UN were created not by Martians but by the ordinary people. And if they did something like that, we are able to create something new, and the part of this has started. The Rome Statute allows us to change the International Criminal Court. We are more active in the UN, and altogether we can change the situation, and we have a very good motivator, that is health and life of our beloved ones and of our relatives, of our co-citizens, fellow citizens. Thank you, Alexandra. And now I would like to pass the floor to Yelizaveta Sokurenko, head of the War Crimes Documentation Department at the Zmina Human Rights Center. Greetings. Do I need to switch something on? Oh. Greetings, everyone. To be honest, I can agree with every word Alexandra has said. And our organization is recording the international documenting the Russian crimes, which are happening in the scales which we have never seen before, and they continue doing that on the territories which are still under temporary Russian occupation. And our work, our beneficiaries are the victims, the witnesses, and the relatives of the victims, who can also be considered victims, actually, due to different violations. And first of all, that is illegal imprisonment, tortures, sexualized tortures, violence, that is kidnapping, execution without court proceedings. And we can see that these things happen quite often. And in some of the cases, all of them can happen regarding towards one person. And the researches we are conducting, and which are based on the evidences we have collected, we can see that the Russian Federation is prosecuting the civilians on the temporary occupied territories. And we can see that despite the fact that the information from the temporary occupied territories arrives to our territories in a very small amount, nevertheless we can see that the duration of this occupation allowed them to attack the civilians even more. And who are prosecuted on the temporary occupied territory? That are the people who are considered by the Russians as the threat, but not because, as we can see, due to the military actions, but more ideologically. That are the people who are considered by the Russians as those who have political position, can identify themselves as Ukrainians and support Ukraine, or even those people who are considered pro-Ukrainian by the Russians. And since 2014, we've seen the filtrations, and this filtration happens in different ways. Even now, we are talking about the searches in the apartments. We are talking about the documents check right on the streets. And now we are documenting the facts that in some of the settlements where, for example, villages or small towns, where there is one village which did not want to take the Russian passport, we know about the pressure, about tortures the Russians do for these people. We know that the Russians are making them move out of these territories by the Russian forces. And also I wanted to say that we were also on the outskirts of Kiev, and we were interviewing the man who was for a long time imprisoned in Kherson, and he has asked us, what is the difference between the POV and civilians? Because there was no answer which satisfied him, because according to him, POVs, that is +1 to statistics, and civilians, that is 0. And I do not want to... And we understand that the Russians are very violent towards the militaries, Ukrainian militaries, defenders, but this phrase means that civilians who were liberated, and as we know, thousands of them are still in the prisons, and about many of them we don't have any information. We do not know nothing about their house state, but we can imagine what happens because we have historical data on this case. So these civilians still feel themselves invisible. They still feel that the state doesn't care about them. And Alexander was talking about the international community, and yes, it's important, but on the level of the state of Ukraine, we need to work more with the liberated civilians. We need to develop. So we are working on that for more than 2 years, but still we do not have the complex system of the support for the liberated civilians from the Russian prisons. They are facing different bureaucratic issues, seeking for the support for themselves. But that support is something they really need, because we can see their physical, mental, and economical state, and we can see what is happening to these people even after some time after liberation. And also, I would like to agree on what was said. As moderator has mentioned, there was an riot of the relatives of the defenders, and that the International Red Cross ICRC is doing nothing about it, and we can see that those norms which were adopted in 1949 do not work at all. And in the framework of what is happening in Ukraine, I agree that that should be the human rights organizations and the relatives of the defenders and the civilians who are uniting into the organizations, and they are seeking for the people they were in imprisonment together. And I know what the government and the law enforcement does in this direction, but we need to make it systematic. We need to understand how we can identify the place where the person is detained, and here we need the support of the international mechanism. And mainly, we can continue creating pressure on them, for them to make a pressure on the Russian Federation, which is sabotaging any kind of human rights rules, any kind of moral rules, and mainly through the culture, through businesses, through social initiatives and international initiatives, we are able to make a pressure on the Russian Federation. We are able to make a sanction pressure on the Russian Federation, and that is our duty, to provide the information to these organizations, even about the exact people, for the representatives of the embassy, for the parliaments, for the businessmen, to ask the Russian Federation, where is this person, so that they would require the access to this person. And till now, I guess that is only the manual. These manual tools can help us to get any information, and therefore I would like to greet the initiative which appeared today. Thank you very much. Thank you. I hope that our project will be beneficial for those who want to make more pressure on the Russian Federation and to release more Ukrainians from the Russian prisons. And also online we will have Marina Hovorukhina, strategic communication specialist of the NGO Common Sense Communications. Ms. Marina, the floor is yours. Greetings. Can you hear me? Yes. One of the most important tasks of our organization is to find the support for Ukraine in the topics which are difficult for communications and civilians illegally kept in the Russian Federation is one of the most important topics. We have conducted the survey and we understand that the citizens of the EU and the US cannot even imagine this kind of situation with the civilians, that there are no mechanism to return, to release these civilians, and that according to the norms of the international law, they could not be captured. And therefore, our organization is actualizing the topic of kidnapping of Ukrainians to involve those who can change the laws and who can help to return these people to Ukraine, because international communication is a mechanism which actually works. Therefore, for 2 years, we are conducting the informational campaigns in the EU, mainly in Germany, and we are urging EU citizens to make a pressure on the local politicians, and the results show that our informational campaigns online and offline were seen by almost 1 million Europeans, and European media were writing about that. And I can assure you that we will continue working in this direction, because Ukrainians who are in the Russian Federation, who are kept in the Russian Federation, they have no tools to be released. They are tortured, and we are the ones who have to become their voice. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Marina. In fact, I wanted to pass the floor to Anastasia Pantelieva, head of the documentation department of the Media Initiative for Human Rights. The floor is yours, Ms. Anastasia. So, in fact, our organization exists since 2016, and we are documenting the war crimes on the temporary occupied territories. At that time, before the full-scale war, that were the territories of Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast and the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. And so far, we can see that the tendency of occupation of the Russian Federation of the other countries, in this case, Ukraine, did not change so far. That is filtration of the civilians, that is imprisonment of the civilians, tortures, persecution, deaths during their detention, murders, and all of these things are just the geography of these things have changed, and it was typical for in 2014 for temporarily occupied at that time territories of Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast. We are researching different oblasts, and we have conducted research in Kyiv Oblast, which was under occupation just for 1 month, but still we can see that some of the people from Kyiv Oblast are kept in the Russian Federation, and that is proved by the people who were released from the Russian occupation and people from the north of the country. Mostly, they were brought to the territory of the Russian Federation together with POVs, Ukrainian POVs, and they are kept in the same places in different colonies and prison bases, and they are tortured, and they are kept not in the proper conditions. And due to these reasons, we have documented evidences of people dying on the territory of the Russian Federation during the detention, and there are both defenders, militaries, and the civilians. All in all, we have identified 1,687 persons who are now kept in the prisons on the territory of the Russian Federation, but we consider that this number can be even 3 or 5 times bigger. The thing is that due to low speed of identification of these people, and it takes time to interview these people, to find the facts, and of course in this way we know less than we would like to do that. If we're talking about the other oblasts, we are also making the researches on the southern territories of Ukraine, and the occupation is longer there for 2.5 years, and there we have the occupational so-called Institute of Law Enforcement of Justice, where the people are not just tortured, but they are made to admit the crimes which are just trumped up charges. Some of them are scaled up, and some of them are happening just because to the fact that the Russian are just blackmailing the people with the house of the people who are kept in their prisons, and sometimes they are making the civilians to write different documents, different appeals and evidences against their relative, and after these circle and after these interview rounds, these people can be moved to the territory of the Russian Federation. They can also be kept on the territory of the temporarily occupied Autonomous Republic of Crimea, where they are sued, and then they are moved to the territory of the Russian Federation to stay in so-called prisons. So what is important in this research? When we're talking about these kind of crimes, it is also important to support psychologically the people who are looking for their relatives, for the support for the people who were released due to official exchanges. And it's also important to provide them with legal support, at least on the national level, to provide the support for the relatives who often do not know who is investigating their case. Quite often, due to their psychological state or due to lack of knowledge, they are not able to communicate properly with the law enforcement. And also, it's important to communicate with the Russian Federation, with the Russian lawyers and advocates, and unfortunately, it's not always the case when we can do that. Well, to be honest, it's very rare when these kind of things are possible, and there are lots of cases which are classified, and nobody can get the information on these cases. Not law enforcement, no civilians, no human rights defenders. So it's very hard to know what are the charges, what is the state of these people. And quite often there are so-called frozen people, the people who are kept incommunicado, and nobody can visit them, and you can find out something about them from the people who were also detained, because they heard this name, and the only thing we can know is that this person had a normal voice, or this person was exhausted. So these kind of initiatives are really needed to draw attention of the international community to this problem, and quite often we need also to draw attention of the citizens of Ukraine who know nothing, who were so lucky not to be the part of all these problems. But nevertheless, it's important to raise awareness both abroad and in Ukraine. And in our organization, we have a similar initiative, and for around 1 year we have the artist who is working with us, and she is drawing the portraits of the detained defenders, and she writes the short story about these people in 7 languages, and it helps us to raise awareness of the international community, and in this way we draw their attention to these pictures. And we urge the citizens of the other countries to send these posters to the embassies of the Russian Federation in the other countries. And unfortunately, the policy of the Russian Federation is that there will be enough of these tourists and enough of illegally kept Ukrainians in the Russian Federation for everyone. And I really appreciate these opportunities to talk about the civilians kept in the Russian prisons. Thank you very much. Together, I hope we will be able to return as many Ukrainians as possible. And a bit later, we will start our discussion. And now I would like to pass to give a brief word to our art curator of our project, Oleh Hryshchenko. Mr. Oleh, the floor is yours. Greetings. First of all, I would like to thank you to participate in these kind of projects. It is extremely important for us, because the projects which are for all people, and of course illustrators and artists cannot stand away aside of these kind of things, because they want to do at most their most for the people to understand this problem both in Ukraine and abroad. And of course, if there are communities which we can keep in touch, we are trying to give a message of the Ukrainian position, because in fact we have lots of colleagues in the other countries, but we don't understand that through the news, through the other messages, the best what Ukrainians can do, the best way to deliver the message, and the art is the way to change the opinion of the person who is still doubting, who doesn't understand the situation fully, because luckily they do not have this kind of experience, and I wish nobody had this kind of experience in this world. But unfortunately, we have a horrible, and it's not an exaggeration, a horrible situation. And as Ukrainian illustrators, first of all, since 2022 we started talking about this problem. Pictoric as a community, we have conducted more than 50 exhibitions all around the world with the people who wanted to talk about Ukraine. And as we are saying, illustrations and the art is something very, very unique, because in this way we can, in a touching way, trigger the observer. And it doesn't matter what kind of status this person has. It can be the diplomat, it can be manager, can be creative community, or just the pedestrians if it is happening just on the streets. And that is a big strength, and you cannot measure it with just ordinary surveys, but we know that it works. We know that according to the experience we already have, and we could not even imagine that it can work like this. So someone left a postcard, and some diplomat saw it, and this diplomat brought this postcard back home, and maybe this diplomat doesn't care about it, but his family will ask, what did you do to help that? And we are working for that, and we will be very happy if it helps. And anyways, we should continue working on this, because now we are in a much better condition than those who we are working for and supporting. And we have always remembered that. Thank you very much. Everyone can do a small thing which can change the world significantly. So that is the official part. We have talked about the project, and if you have any kind of questions, you can ask them. No questions? Okay, I have. Yes, you can. So now this project is establishing. Mr. Oleh and his illustrators club, Pictoric, they are working on it. There are going to be 10 illustrations with the stories of the civilians who were imprisoned by the Russian Federation, and we are going to tell their stories. There will be QR code which you can use to read the story. What is Mr. Oleh and his team, they have a few ideas they're working on, and as far as I understand, these ideas are super classified and we cannot talk more about them, but we will definitely show them, and that this exhibition will be on tour in the European cities, because our objective is to draw attention to the civilians, to the problem of civilians who are imprisoned by the Russian Federation, because we are going to talk more about this, and Alexandra and her colleagues, human rights defenders, are emphasizing that all the time. So POVs have status, and it is easier to return them. There is a mechanism to return the militaries, but there are no mechanism to return the civilians, because to the international legislation, they do not exist. it is impossible for the army to come and the army just took us, put us in the vehicle, bring us to the prison, say you are the criminals. Well, as far as I know, there are no mechanism and no legislation which say this kind of situation. And in most of the cases, these people are just staying in prison with no actual charges. And the worst thing is that, from my personal experience of communicating with the colleagues from the other organizations, that it is an endless number of Ukrainians, all the Ukrainians who are now on the temporary occupied territory that is the database of potential clients for the prisons. So at any time they can come and they can put them in the prison and they can take, and it's very difficult to return these civilians to Ukraine. So why did we establish with Common Sense Communications this project? We established it to help through the art to touch the hearts of the Europeans and Americans. Because we also have the project which I'm representing, where our people are. So our project, in the focus of our project, we have the children. And when I was in the US, people were surprised that the children are kidnapped. They were so surprised that we have thousands of kidnapped children, and which are now adopted in the foster families in the Russian Federation, and they do not know about thousands of the prisoners. But Ukraine alone cannot make a pressure on the Russian Federation to return all these people. So we are using all the opportunities. Our army and our partners, Common Sense, decided that we can do that through illustrations, so that we could show the destinies, the lives of these people, and we can tell their stories, because the best thing to trigger people is the empathic story, the real story. When you show the person, when you show that this person has family, has neighbors, has everything, and you tell the story, and then it is very difficult to ignore this kind of story. In the human way, it is hard to ignore these kind of cases when you can see the real person who has really suffered and who you can really help. And it's very hard to say that I'm not going to do that when you're looking in the eyes. So we want to raise it on a higher level. We want to invite as many media as possible. We want to cover it in as many media as possible for the people electing the politicians. They could ask us, I said, what did you do for these people? And then media comes, what did you do to help Ukrainian civilians to return them home? And maybe in this way, even if we will return a few persons, it will be great. But I hope that we will return all of them. But I think that it will happen only after Ukraine prevails in this war. And I think Alexandra wants to add something. The exact text will be available a bit later. We will have also the exhibition in Kyiv, because in fact in Kyiv we have lots of foreigners, especially journalists, and I think that it will be interesting for them. So indeed, when we are talking about civilians, they are almost invisible nowadays. They are invisible due to few reasons. First of all, because there are just a few people who can imagine that someone needs a civilian. So now my colleagues have mentioned about the labor exploitation, and we can see that the Russian Federation uses these tools since 2014, when the actual war started, and that was a crazy wave of illegal coal extraction on Donbas territory. In fact, after 2014, this coal was extracted by the people who were illegally imprisoned. So now we have the information that our civilians in the illegal imprisonment are always made to make the trenches, to demolish the buildings and whatever. So in the international humanitarian law, it is said that the people have to be kept in their good conditions with normal medical, with the proper medical, sufficient medical support, with a sufficient nutrition. They can restore the buildings. And we know that nothing is written like that about civilians who are imprisoned. And once again, I would like to remind you that it's de facto the new type of crime against humanity, or the war crime. So if we describe it, we can see that there is no category like that. And for the last time, Ostarbeiter, we remember that that was the Second World War, when from the territories of the occupied Republic Belarus and Ukraine were sent to Germany to work. But you can imagine that it is prohibited by the international law, because it's human trafficking, because it's kidnapping the person, imprisonment, and exploitation. The weirdest thing is that the Russian legislation doesn't know what to do with them as well, because most of them have no charges and they are kept for 2-3 years in prison, in detention. Sometimes they are kept officially in the official places, and even the administration of these prison and detention center, they know nothing what to do with them. And there is an aspect. So when the group is too big, they are considered to be the threat for the discipline in the detention center, and therefore they are splitting Ukrainians and sending Ukrainians to all this big system of the prisons in the Russian Federation. So they are trafficking them and giving them the SKU number as a number, because otherwise they cannot send them, because even according to the Russian legislation, it is illegal to traffic people in this way. So they have the SKU numbers. So they use SKU numbers for the furniture to send these people between the prisons. So we have to understand that, first of all, this is a violation of the international human law. And I'm talking about the conditions the prisoners are kept in. And if we call POV just to justify their imprisonment when we're talking about the civilians, it doesn't mean that these people can be exchanged or they will have proper conditions. And therefore, we have so many requests to ICRC, and people are saying, oh, they cannot fight for getting inside the prison. But, dear colleagues, they can say that our mandate, which is given to us, cannot be implemented, because you have to invent something new, some new mandate. Because when we are contacting, for example, ICRC, and after that, all the ropes are cut. So that is a problem we are facing when we see that the new type of the war, which the Russian Federation has invented right now, it's happening not just here, it is happening all around the globe. But nevertheless, the Russian Federation has concentrated all their forces, and they have created 2 new types war crimes, and that are the war crimes are the crimes of the highest level. So therefore, Ukraine has to be inside all the mechanisms. First of all, to be able to force them to work for us, and second of all, to create these kind of tools, because this situation is a consequence of the Russian Federation having no punishment for the previous violation of the international humanitarian law. That is not about Donetsk, Luhansk Oblast and the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, which should have been punished, but that is also Syria, that is participation in various legal and illegal operations in Latin America and Africa. Wagner was training, exercising in Latin America and in Africa before they started doing that in Ukraine. Unfortunately, we were not reacting, and our diplomats were not doing that. Before we had Georgia, we had Transnistria, we had the others, Afghanistan, and we saw that it's not about us. It will never touch us. And in this way, we brought the enemy to our territory. And therefore, Ukraine has to be an active actor in establishment of the new international rules of the security rules. And this security should not be like in China. That shouldn't be something like we are controlling everyone, that nobody can come close to the occupied territories. No, everyone has to leave if there is occupation. So we know that it's a very emotional, very difficult situation. And during these years of occupation, we know the people who return into the occupied territories because they have the real the property there, and they know how everything works there. And we have to remember that the human rights is something we are fighting for, because having a small Russia means losing to a big Russia. So I would like to remind you, so Ukraine has a home task, that is rehabilitation, resocialization of all the people who are returning, both civilians and offenders. Unfortunately, now civilians have no programs which can help them to do that. That is the support for the relative, that is support for the families, and that is the most important thing. So we have to use as many international contacts to return all Ukrainians back home. Thank you. Thank you, dear colleagues. Maybe you want to add something? Miss Anastasia? Miss Yelizaveta? No? Wow. If there are no further questions, no questions, so thank you very much for staying with us. Please come to our exhibitions. A bit later, we will inform you the days. Thank you very much for caring. If all of us will unite and will join, at least with a drop of our time and attention, we will be able to come closer to the time when the relatives will be able to hug their beloved one, their fathers, their mothers, their children. And if we will do something every day, we have the chance to make this day come sooner, and we'll inform you on the dates of the exhibition. Thank you very much for caring. Thank you very much for joining, and all the best to you. See you soon.